I think we all learned this morning that this is a transformational day, potentially, for Nevada. I have been in the affordable housing space since 1991, working both in the private sector as well as in the government agencies. And I think that I really was just, anytime we have the opportunity for this incredible amount of funding, it is, wow, I was just, couldn't believe it. And I don't know if everyone noticed, but Secretary Todman, Secretary Todman this morning, if you noticed over her shoulder, there was all these shovels. And I thought to myself, wow, how cool would it be if a lot of those shovels were for Nevada? And she was here. And these gentlemen here are the experts in how we go from a dream, a vision, to actually shovels in the ground and getting things done. We have some amazing people in this state that have done wonderful things since 1991 when we first started. But now, the talent that's in this room, that's part of the Nevada Housing Coalition, we have the opportunity to truly transform Nevada, in my opinion. And so finally in my lifetime, before I get out of this business, I think we're going to see a lot of shovels in the ground. We've got some great developers in the state, and it warms my heart to see the state really continue to advance and move in a direction that's going to be really just seismic as far as I'm concerned. So our panel this morning, though, their incredible bios are in the program by scanning. But by way of introduction, Patrick West is with Stonehenge. And Stonehenge, he is an associate with Stonehenge's Capital's Tax Credit Services team. He's responsible for the origination, underwriting of state affordable housing tax credit investments nationwide. So we really want him to feel warm and welcome, and we love,
so far, so good.
We love Stonehenge.
We'll see when we get to the Q&A.
David Paull, by way, it's amazing what Nevada Hand has accomplished in Southern Nevada, and I was blessed to know the former CEO when they had started this thing, and they had this vision, and now, my goodness, Nevada Hand is just an amazing provider of housing and supportive services for working families and seniors for 27 years. I'm aging myself quite rapidly here. And then, of course, Steve Aichroth. What can I say? The administrator of our Nevada Housing Division. Steve is probably a breath of fresh air for everyone that's working in this housing space. He's accessible. His team is incredible. They're knowledgeable, and they want to help. It's the can-do agency with the state. Not that all the agencies are, it's just they're so overwhelmed right now. But this agency over the course of the next few years is going to be just slammed. But we are fortunate that we have Steve, Dr. May Worthy is in the back, and this team, Mike Holliday, you met yesterday on the Zoom. These guys are incredible. So we talked about the money panel. This is the money. And they know how to do it. They know how to help you. They know how to guide you. And so with that, I'm going to let each of them, Steve, I'll let you start since you have the mic right there. It's already green.
Thank you, Mendy. Thank you for that incredibly generous and thoughtful compliment. I'll try to live up to that expectation. When we talk about state tax credits, I'm gonna go back in time, not quite to 1991, but to 2017, pre-COVID. If you can all remember back that far, past March of 2020. And it's really important to understand, and this will come up a little bit later, probably in the Q&A, on Nevada's legislative construct. I know there's some folks who are not from the state and and may not be familiar with the way that Nevada legislature is held, but basically the legislature meets for 120 days every 2 years in session, and that's where statutes like the establishment of the state tax credits get done. Their special sessions are only called for single issue things, and we're going to have one shortly, I believe, for redistricting. So with that background, we go back to 2017. And in 2017, an interim committee was created to study affordable housing. And that committee, so again, the legislators meet for 120 days. That's not their job. They're not walking out of the building on day 120 going, woo, that was good. Don't have to see anybody for 2 years. They actually form these interim committees, and a lot of good work can get done in these interim committees. And this particular one, a lot of good work got done. There were 5 what are called BDRs, bill draft requests, that were created out of it, ultimately for presentation to the 2019 legislative session. All 5 of those passed. Some were modified and tweaked a little bit, but all 5 of them passed. And one of them was the state tax credit bill, initially SB 448, in the 2017 or 2019 session. And that provided for $40 million in state tax credits. And it allows the division to issue transferable tax credits against certain state taxes to the sponsor of an affordable housing project. So that's really the construct of the tax credit. Pretty hard to get a state tax credit through in a state that has no income tax. So it was applied to 3 taxes. One is the excise tax on banks and payroll taxes, 2, the general tax on insurance, and 3, gaming licensing fees. And the way the bill was constructed was we received $10 million per year in the ability to issue those credits, up to $13 million if necessary, and it would expire after 4 years. Now, when we went through the presentation to the group, we really modeled it after, and you heard Mr. Holliday talk about this yesterday, our GAP program. And our GAP financing program provided up to $3 million in financing specifically for bond funded projects. We had a limited amount, as he indicated. We were able to do, we had $6 million annually for these projects. By structuring it along the lines and presenting it as to what we could generate from these tax credits, using the GAP program as a model, $10 million, basically 3 times, we would get 2 projects typically out of that $6 million in GAP funding. So we anticipated 3 additional projects annually coming from the state tax credits. Part of one of the pieces in that legislation was that the state tax credits could not begin to be issued until January of 2020. So again, the 2019 session ends roughly June of 2019. 6 months go through. The division can't issue any tax credits until January of 2020. Again, a little bit pre-COVID, but by March it was pretty prevalent that there was Houston, we had a problem. Everything, you guys from out of town are probably staying at resort casinos, hotels. Maybe you're having dinner here in town. Anything that you're going to do in Vegas was shut down. So there was no money coming into the general fund. And effectively, these state tax credits, although they're applied to 3 specific taxes, or a combination thereof, really are some of the biggest generators for that general fund. So basically, we had to say, stop, we're out. I mean, we at the division, we took furlough days. I mean, everybody had to give. There was no money that the division had any interest in while we're either laying off, not filling positions, and this is statewide, to say, oh yeah, let's just give out $10 million of general fund money for the development of affordable housing. That was not our place to do that. So we really put a pause on the program until we could figure out, all right, we're going to get through this. We're going to see it. The resorts are opening back up. All right, so we can get back on track. So that really caused some consternation and some issues. So fast forward to 2021, legislation by the time, or legislative session, by the time January of 2021 rolled around, we had actually issued, or reserved, not issued, $3 million in state tax credits. And I'm not going to pull away David's thunder. He can talk about that, but we reserved those for Nevada Hand. In Nevada Hand's particular situation, they ran into an issue with trying to market those credits and trying to get those credits in play. And that led to some what was referred to as a cleanup bill in the 2021 legislation, SB 284, again, for those taking notes. And it effectively did three things to clean it up, to make it work, the state tax credit program work a little bit better. Number one, in the initial legislation, when we reserved it and issued it to the project sponsor, they could then transfer it to another entity that would receive the benefit of those tax credits. Well, it really wasn't contemplated that within that entity, they could transfer it amongst themselves. So we had to clean that up. That was sort of a minor little tweak that had to get done. The second thing, which was a little bit more important, was that the initial tax credits were, in the initial legislative package, were to be issued at certificate of occupancy. It was going to be the last money into the deal. So everybody is pretty, well, hopefully most of you are pretty familiar. A deal will close at financing, and then it's 2 years, sometimes more, depending on the economic situation, before people start to occupy those buildings. And so effectively, while they knew that they could redeem those, we could issue those tax credits, it wasn't until the project was effectively complete that they could get the benefit of it. So the language was changed in the legislation that we could issue the tax credits at financial close. So it eliminated that gap, that 2.5 or 2 year time frame, and everybody is very much aware time is money. So that did increase the value of, or we're hoping that that will increase the value of the tax credits. The third thing it did basically was remove that sunset. It was supposed to sunset, I think, June 30th of 2023. So we had 4 years to spend $40 million between the 6-month lag before we could issue, and then 18 months of COVID. There was no way that we were going to get this money out as fast as we could in that time period. So that's what SB 284 has done. So those changes actually are in place now. There's still some discussion, and we'll have some discussion later as to can they be retro in your particular case, David. But I want to let everybody know that basically the framework for the tax credits is in our QAP. It was in our 2021 QAP. It will be in our 2022 QAP. It is still, at the moment, specific for bond projects, specific for new construction, because we did frame it as a production model, the way to get more units out on the market. And so in that QAP, you can get up to $3 million of tax credits if you develop over 150 units and you buy down some of those units into lower income AMIs. And I think with that, that provides the overview, and I'll take a breath and pass it on to David.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Again, I'm David Paull. I'm with Nevada Hand. Nevada Hand is a nonprofit affordable housing developer that has been doing it for almost 3 decades now, and we've developed over 5,000 units of affordable housing during that time, and we currently have 650 under construction right now. We develop under the low-income housing tax credit program, both the 4% credits with tax-exempt bonds and the 9% credits, and really any other source of housing finance for affordable housing. And now the state tax credits. We often find that we're the guinea pig for the housing division for all new programs. They try it out on us and how it works, and then modify it for everybody else that comes afterwards. But we're happy to do it, and it's been a great partnership. I do want to make a plug to our Nevada Housing Division and how good they are to work with. When we're closing the financing for our Decatur and Alta project, if you want to put a slide up, please go ahead. I believe Steve on Thanksgiving Day, I'm pretty sure it was Thanksgiving Day, actually, all right, day after, was gathering signature pages from the housing division's attorney and others so that we could close this financing on his day off. So they are fantastic to work with. I will say the best in the nation. And as I'm in many groups around the country, I can tell you that is a fact. So our Decatur and Alta project here was the first award for the state housing tax credit, and it happened during COVID, which caused many logistical problems, and one being that there was really no buyer for the tax credits, as Steve alluded to. So because of that, we had an amended bill for the state tax credit. And also because of that, the housing division bridged those tax credits so we could close our financing on it and figure out how we sold those tax credits after our financial closing. So once again, thank you for helping us get that done. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So this development, it's 420 units. We figured for the first development with state housing tax credits, we should go big or go home, and COVID hit, and we all did literally go home. And I had a lot more hair before we closed the financing on this development, and you can see me now. No, that's not really true. I've never had any hair. So it's 200. Hey, this is great. I spent 1.5 years talking to my family, and even my dog doesn't want to listen to me anymore. So, as you can see, 240 family units, 180 senior units. It's actually part of a larger project that's 480 units in total. So we have an additional 60 units as a separate phase. The AMIs are between 30 and 80% of the area median income. And we have 36 units at 30% of AMI, which we are incredibly proud of and we think is incredibly important. And to see what you can do with getting additional sources for housing is really target a little bit lower. In our state, we're the worst or the second worst in the nation, depending on stats you want to look at for 30% AMI units. So we are incredibly proud and excited about that, and hope to do more of that in the future. Our development is currently under construction. Go ahead to the next slide there. All right, that's a rendering of what it'll look like. Go to the next slide, please. And this is about 4 months ago. So we're a little bit further along in construction, but that's the first drone picture, or the latest drone picture that we have. Our first buildings are going to be delivered in January of 2022. So our first families will move in then, and we will be complete by the end of May. Despite COVID and everything that's going on, we're only about 3 weeks behind schedule, which is amazing for a development of this size. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So our sources of financing for this deal, it's $90 million in total. We have 8 different sources, which include 4% tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, housing trust funds, the state housing tax credit, home funds from both the city and the county, developer financing, and of course, gap financing from the Nevada Housing Division, which we were also the first to use and the guinea pig on that. And apparently it's worked out because many of you have used it since. This was incredibly challenging development to get going during COVID. And we have to say a very big thank you to Wells Fargo, who I believe is in the audience, for supplying the tax credit equity in our construction financing when others backed out during this time because they just had no idea what was going on during the pandemic. Go ahead to the next slide. So you can see here how we were able to leverage $3 million in state housing tax credits to bring in $86 million of additional financing. So just a little bit of additional financing to fill gaps goes a very, very long way for affordable housing. And said another way, for every $1 we received, it brought in $29 more of additional financing, which is a huge return on investment, and hopefully one that will lead to further funding for the state housing tax credit once we use our initial $40 million. So I think with that, I will throw it over to Patrick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick West, and I'm an associate at Stonehenge Capital. We are a specialty finance firm co-headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Columbus, Ohio, and we have offices in 6 other states. Stonehenge has 3 business lines that we invest through. I am part of the tax credit services group, and our responsibility is to invest private capital into developments and projects that generate state and federal tax credits. Our TCS group is what we call it. We cover a wide range of tax credit products, including state LIHTCs, federal and state historic rehabilitation tax credits, federal renewable energy tax credits, state film production tax credits, and a number of other incentive programs that I'm not going to continue to list on. To date, Stonehenge has monetized approximately $4.2 billion in state and federal tax credits nationwide, and we have experience in investing in over 72 unique state tax credit programs within 37 states. Stonehenge as a firm has been actively investing in the state of Nevada since 2014 through the state's new market tax credit program. And from that, our investors continue to have tax liability and appetite in the state. You can start the presentation. Let's see. You can go to the next slide. To start off the presentation, I kind of want to show the wave of state LIHTC programs that have been happening across the country that have recently passed in the past couple of years. As most of you are aware, there's a national emphasis on producing more housing and specifically affordable housing. A number of states have taken matters into their own hands and created state tax credit programs to attract more private capital in affordable housing within their respective state. At the start of 2020, there were 17 states plus Washington, D.C. that had active state low-income housing tax credit programs, and 9 states had proposed legislation to enact a program. You can go to the next slide. Now, when we fast forward that to, go back. There we go. Now, when we fast forward that to 2021, there are 22 states plus Washington, D.C. that have active state LIHTC programs, and 9 states have also proposed legislation within the past 2 years. In the past year and a half, we've added 5 more states that have LIHTC programs, which include Arizona, South Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maine. As affordable housing continues to be a major emphasis for state and local governments, we should expect to see more states following suit and enacting more state LIHTC programs across the country. You can go to the next slide. One program I want to highlight that runs a very efficient and well-run program is the state of Colorado and their affordable housing tax credit program. Although Colorado's state tax credit functions different than how this tax credit is supposed to work, the program is run extremely efficiently and has produced great results for Colorado affordable housing. Since the program was reauthorized in 2015, the state affordable housing tax credit program has nearly doubled its yearly affordable housing supply, added over 4,800 new affordable rental units, and leveraged over $500 million in new private sector investment, while only being able to be paired with the 4% federal LIHTC. So that's only half of the deals, essentially. You can go to the next slide. And then this is probably the most important slide, is we often get asked on the state tax credit side, or what are investors looking for in a state tax credit? What drives the most dollars to a project? Why is the Nevada LIHTC a tax credit that I'm interested in? And the chart that I have displayed here is, this is how we look at each tax credit program, although you probably can't see it now that I'm looking at it. My apologies. So the chart I have here is a snapshot of how we explain programs to our investors. Now that I'm looking at it, so the things that are on there are credit period, like how many years do these credits flow? So like the federal LIHTC, it's a 10-year credit. This is a 1-year credit. Let's see, what else we got in there? How the credit actually works. So the federal LIHTC is an allocated credit that flows from the partnership all the way up through. This is a certificated credit. So this doesn't require us to be a partner in your lower tier entity. This is strictly, we're purchasing a credit, and we're basically buying a piece of paper. There's no other economics in the deal. It's a very simple and easy execution. As I alluded to, this is a 1-year credit. So usually that for our investors, when they had to project their tax liability over a 10-year period, specifically with state taxes, that's a pretty hard task to do. I can't personally project my tax liability out for the next 10 years. So for large companies, that's a pretty hard task to do, specifically within state programs and state taxes. And the other thing that we really like is recapture. So with this credit, as long as these credits are purchased in good faith, there's no recapture risk to the investor. So with that usually equals more demand, because it's an easier credit and an easier execution, and also drives more dollars and better pricing to the project, which I think was the ultimate goal of this credit. And with that, that's pretty much my spiel.
So I'm sure there's questions. I mean, I have some questions that I can ask, but I'm sure in the room there's some questions, or I'm writing to online. Do you have any questions online?
Who's going to be the one? There we go.
Any questions? Okay.
Oh, I have all sorts of questions.
Is there no recapture risk with all of the state tax credits?
As long as, as currently drafted, that and in the QAP, as long as these are purchased in good faith, as long as there's no lying or anything involved, these are correct. As far as I read it, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong.
The risk is really only with the developer, not the investor. So if the developer doesn't perform, the liability is on them. If the investor does it in good faith, they're fine.
Okay, so the recapture risk goes to the developer and not the investor. Secondly, Patrick and David, can you guys provide your slides, since we clearly couldn't see them?
Yeah, I can.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then one other comment, Dora, on the recapture. When the project financially closes, the division is going to look and make sure that the use of the tax credits was appropriate and necessary. And in today's construction environments, it's a pretty low bar to clear.
And we're assuming that the developer is going to provide some sort of guarantee for that. In other words, that there is recapture risk if the developer doesn't follow through. They're assuming the risk.
That's correct. They have to do a couple of things. They have to follow all the LIHTC guidelines. So that's what it was sort of modeled after. And all those kind of little check marks along the way have to be done. If that makes sense.
So have you guys talked about the mechanics by which the money would flow to the project? And are there, some of the things we've been talking about is that typically grant funds are loaned into a tax credit project. So one mechanism might be to that the actual tax certificate is sold by a conduit, by a nonprofit who receives the grant funds and then lends them into the project, or that the investor becomes a special limited partner, investor partner, and is contributing the funds to the project and is sort of staying on in some way. And I don't know if any of these have been vetted with the legislation to know if there's any technicalities that since we don't want to go back to the legislature a third time, if there's any technicalities that need to be vetted on how we actually get the money into the project.
So I think I'll try to answer that the best I can. I think Mendy pointed out very in her overview that it was simple execution, and I'm not saying that's the best execution for the benefit of the monetary value of the state tax credit and how it and the mechanisms, but effectively we need to provide, and we're going to issue that tax credit to the project sponsor, who is defined as an owner in the project. So that's where it goes to, and I don't want to say at that point the division's out of it or not, but sort of what the developer, the project sponsor, I'll broaden that, whatever entity that is, as long as they're providing the trail on how they are transferring or who they're going to transfer that state tax credit to, that's sort of the path that it goes down. So I don't think what you have mentioned, Eric, really was contemplated. I think that would almost have to be legislatively changed, unless that nonprofit is somehow an owner and the project sponsor.
I'm trying to, and I'm sorry, one is the certificate, what happens to that? And one is what happens to the money. And so the certificate would go to the sponsor.
That's correct. That's correct.
And the sponsor would then sell the certificate to an investor.
That's correct.
And so that's one transaction. And then that investor can sell it one more time to a related party. Is that how?
Good question. I'm not 100% clear on that.
Oh, okay. So we need to work out.
We envisioned it effectively. The first transaction, yes. Then the project sponsor will be probably working through a syndicator to provide it to somebody who can get the benefit of that tax credit, i.e. a gaming company or something of that ilk.
Other questions? There, question in the back.
My question is related. Could you shed some light on?
Could you shed some light on? Ooh.
Speak louder. It's a fake microphone.
It's just for the online. So just. Yeah.
Could you shed some light on equity pricing?
So far, we've looked at a number of deals, and the pricing that we've been giving to sponsors has been in the high 80s, even approaching 90 cents. So that's where we've been. Yeah, and
LIHTC and state.
That's just the state.
Okay.
Just the state credit.
Is it combined with the state and the LIHTC tax credit, or it's just?
They are separate. They're not one and the same.
Thanks for repeating that.
Yeah.
One's off your state tax responsibility, where if you're gaming, insurance, or the banking tax, or when the LIHTC is off federal. So that's the distinction.
Yes, thanks.
So the sponsor who receives the initial state credit certificate, is that generally contemplated to be the general partner or the managing member of the ultimate owner of the property? Because you have to be related or in the ownership, right? So you probably want it to go to the general partner or the managing member.
So the way the statute reads, it's a person, and it's not a natural person, because we had those issues with the our Legislative Council Bureau. So a person is an entity, if you want to look at it that way, who has an ownership interest. So that's what's considered very narrowly the project sponsor.
Yeah. So my guess is it's probably going to go initially to the general partner or managing member, just from a tax standpoint, in order to be able to.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on the next.
Yeah, David in the capital
Okay.
stack, I guess.
And then can you verify that so you said the certificate is issued at initial financial close and is immediately available to be filed with the tax? I mean, that's pretty unique from a state housing certificate program, whether it's a historic state certificate or housing certificate.
Yeah, these were modeled effectively, again, for those of you who are from out of state, after the Tesla tax credits. So Tesla received some tax credits to build their gigafactory in northern Nevada. And what we heard, ancillary to this, was literally the day they were issued those tax credits, they redeemed them.
Yeah.
Like within 20 minutes.
That's
Something crazy like that.
That's terrific. Time value of money and the benefits immediately flowing. I mean, it's going to maximize the value of those credits. So kudos, great, wonderful. And so I guess another question, it was mentioned that in exchange for the tax credit certificate, you're writing down rents on some of the units to achieve a deeper level of affordability. I was wondering if anybody could talk to, the trade-off of doing so in order to get the $3 million in tax credits, which have a net value of less than that, versus the impact to NOI and supportable debt. Like, what's sort of the trade-off? Are you sort of a net positive on a sources standpoint, even though you're reducing your NOI because you're achieving greater affordability and getting a lower first mortgage in exchange for the equity that's coming along with the state credits? And what's that approximate trade-off?
That's a really good question. We're probably about net break even roughly. When we looked at it back when we started this development, we calculated we needed about $100,000 per 30% unit to be at a break even. That wouldn't hold true today with construction costs that are probably 30% higher than when we closed this development. But that's a calculation we backed into to make, all things being equal, that we would break even about $100,000 per unit in subsidy for the 30% units. So, and then we looked at it as how many 30% units make sense in a project of this size, and it was roughly around the 10%. If we could do 10%, we thought that was about the right mix, and then having income staggered all the way up provides I call it a mixed affordable income development.
Since we're talking about the QAP, I think one of the questions that I'm kind of hearing is that the 2022 QAP for the allocation of state tax credits is final, or is there some leeway? Because now we have, can you have leeway to change it? For instance, the ARPA funds are coming in, and we might have an opportunity to do some changes to what our allocation looks like.
Yeah, so that's basically the state tax credits live in an appendix in the QAP. The QAP 2022 QAP was going to be adopted this week, but I had other business to attend to.
Yay!
So it should be done first part of next week. That's why we put the state tax credits basically in the QAP, so we could modify it. I mentioned the legislative process. If it was somehow in a statute that we had to change, we'd have to wait 2 years, literally 2 years, to change anything. There's a regulatory process that the state can also go through to do these tax credits. And Mendy, I think you'll back me up on this.
David's here too. So
Yeah, that's not a very rapid process either. So by placing it in the QAP, we have some flexibility to do the things that you've mentioned. Now, in regards to ARPA funds, We're still sort of evaluating that, because one of the things that is required, to go back to what we were talking about, was that you have to follow the LIHTC guidelines. And we know that potentially there's going to be some standalone ARPA funded projects, and are they going to be eligible for state tax credits? So really, we have to work with council to figure out how that mechanism, if it can work, how it will work, and what sort of compliance and things of that nature are we going to need to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question from our online audience.
Yes, we have a question. Are you expecting the minimum corporate tax in BBB to affect pricing? And this is a federal credit question.
Yeah, I think it's for Patrick.
Are you expecting the minimum corporate tax in BBB to affect pricing? And that's a federal question.
Still kind of confused by the question here.
Yeah, I don't, it's not applying to state tax credits.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of confused.
I think I can try and answer that because I have looked at that. So if there's a federal minimum corporate tax or corporate tax floor at 15%, you'd have to look at who are the major buyers of federal tax credits, and most of them are large financial institutions, and look at what is the corporate tax rate they're paying right now. There are some of them that are below that 15% floor that has been discussed, and it might be that they're out of the market for tax credits unless there's some additional legislation that exempts housing tax credits. So yes, it could affect the pricing. We just don't know yet. We don't know what the bill will actually look like, and is it a true 15% floor, or are there exceptions for housing tax credits?
Well, since we're talking about investors, I think, Patrick, I'm curious from Stonehenge's perspective, do you already have investors interested in Nevada? And
Yeah, to answer your question, yes, we do. But like I've said earlier, we've been investing in state tax credit programs here since 2014. We already have an investor base lined up, and this is a credit that we've presented to them, and they're certainly interested in. So I think by us having that foundation of an investor base already lined up and having participated in state tax credit programs here in the state, which is hard when you don't have an income tax, is a huge plus. So to answer your question, yes.
is there a reason why we shouldn't have included mining in the allocation of the availability of a tax credit?
So as a couple of former legislators that are here, mining is it is sort of a sacred cow in Nevada, and I'm going to revert back to these were modeled after the Tesla tax credits, and so that was the template, for lack of a better word. We had to skew it, of course. And so if it wasn't contemplated there, and it may not have been contemplated there, strictly from, and this is just me prognosticating a little bit, number one, mining sacred. Number two, okay, so the battery company that's going to make lithium batteries gets a break on potentially mining lithium. That might not, the transparency, there might be some issues. And David?
I don't think mining, I represent mining, so just to add a little color.
Oh, wait a second.
Oh, sorry.
Let get the mic. Thanks, David.
Just full disclosure, David Goldwater, I represent the mining industry, represent Nevada gold mines. And the reason it's not covered is because in this particular program is the mining tax is allocated, it's collected statewide, but it's allocated 50% to the local governments and 50% to state. So without the acquiescence of local governments too, it's tough to offer that credit. And that's why mining would love to participate. There is now a mining tax that is only statewide, but it goes directly to schools. And that, you can kind of see the interplay there. There's no sacred cow, there's no protection. It's just the allocation of the taxes and how those credits play.
Thanks, David. Other questions in the audience? Eric? Wait.
Yeah, and just a reminder that the genesis of this legislation was we wanted to get more money committed to housing through the state budget, and the most palatable way of doing that is through a tax credit. And so if we could have done a tax certificate that could be redeemed directly with taxation, we would have done that. The legislators thought that was too transparent, so we have an intermediate where we have to work through syndicate. We have to work through investors to do that. But this was the whole idea was more money for housing. I did want to, David, I think that the QAP right now is only requiring 8 50% AMI units or 4 30% AMI units. So it's not a wash. I mean, I actually think when you go from 60 to 50% AMI, maybe it's $20,000 less debt per unit. Go down to 30, maybe it's 50%, $50,000 less debt per unit. But it is a net positive in terms of financing of the affordable housing. I don't think that I think that the requirements are pretty we're creating a token number more extremely low income units in a bond project, but actually this is really a very powerful financing source for new bond projects. So thanks.
Other questions? I do have a question, and we've been hearing a lot about low income, accessible housing, workforce housing, and sometimes the conversations gets blurred because you're not sure what each of them means. I mean, from as long as I've been in this game, it's been, affordable housing, supportable housing, all kinds of different housing. And what does that mean from a development perspective? So I kind of have a two-part question. What are the risks in looking at these needs together versus addressing them separately? And then my second part to the question is, what is the ideal role of the state tax credit in these discussions?
I guess I'll start on that. I think you 100% have to address homeless housing separately from affordable housing or workforce housing. I consider affordable housing workforce housing. It doesn't matter who it's targeting. It's for people. But I think you do need to look at them separately. They are different animals. Housing for formerly homeless tends to require lots of operating subsidies that your typical affordable or workforce housing does not require. Typically you have residents who just can't pay rent in formerly homeless housing, so you have to have those subsidies, and without those being paired with the state credit or any other credits, you run the risk of unsuccessful developments putting a state credit into that type of housing without those subsidies.
So again, sort of going back to some of the stuff that you actually heard this morning, and I'm going to respond to sort of how the state tax credits play across that spectrum. We know we have home ARP funds. Mm-hmm. The primary use of those funds is to reduce homelessness. We know, well, I shouldn't say we know. We expect a dramatic increase in National Housing Trust funds. And as Joey from NLIHC indicated, that is for 30% and below primarily. And I'm not saying that potentially is enough funding. But going back to your QAP question, that's why we want to be mobile to a certain extent and allow for a lot of the different funding sources that came in. The 4% floor had an immediate impact on our GAP program and potentially how this is used. So things are moving. It's government. You typically think of government moving slow. Things are moving really, really fast, especially in the affordable housing space. And I think today is a great testament to that. And so I think from a state tax credit perspective, while we were developing the 2022 QAP, we basically, aside from the changes that were allowed by the recently passed legislation, we were looking at changing it and doing things, and we thought, things are just moving so fast. Let's keep it the way it is. Let's try to keep it still as a production model. If we need to adjust, then we can adjust. And I think that's sort of where we're looking at it from a holistic perspective.
So we have $3.6 million, I believe, has been allocated to your project? 3 million to your project. Is there any, what's of the residual $37 million, is there anything been identified? Any projects? Or is the 37 million still available?
The bulk of it is, I will say that. I know Michael has at least one application on his desk requesting state tax credits. He may have others that I'm unaware of at this point. Again, we are still limited. This did not change in the amending legislation to 10 million annually, with the ability to go up to 13 million in issuance. If we issue 13 million, then we do have to reduce by 3 million the next year's allocation.
Unless we go back to the legislature.
Okay, there you go.
Unless we go back to the legislature. Hillary, thank you.
I just wanted to say two things. One, thank you for leaving some flexibility in the QAP, because I think especially now with new sources of funding becoming available, we'll have unique opportunities. And so having that flexibility to fund those types of projects is great. So we appreciate the division doing that. The other piece that I just want to ask about is, I know currently the tax credits are being included as part of the capital stack, and just identified in the application that we're submitting, the bond applications that we're submitting, and being reviewed by the division at that point in time. Do you anticipate any different process for requesting those credits going forward? And if so, will there also be someplace where developers can access kind of a current tally of how much is available of the annual allocation, so that they have that information ahead of putting together projects?
So those are two really, really good points. And we can take those under advisement. I think, well, as we have it structured right now, it's basically going to come through a LIHTC application, because it is 4% bond. Again, trying to keep it simple. If we find that either through the 4% floor, these other sources of funding, we need to make those changes, then we make the changes as you indicated in the QAP to do that. A dashboard, probably, and I'm thinking out loud as we try to potentially expand the use of those, probably not a bad thing to have, so that there's some ability for folks to see exactly what might be available for any other type of project that might be outside of that LIHTC box. But we're not there yet, but those are good thoughts.
So Patrick, I have a question for you relative to just Nevada. What is the perception of Nevada, outside in the marketplace? Is this a place that people want to do business? Or it's encouraging that we have all this, we have the ARPA money coming, the Nevada Housing Coalition has put a request in through the treasurer and through the governor. We heard the governor is committed to affordable housing. Are we going to be, we're open for business. Is this, but does the rest of the world know that?
I mean, to answer your question, I certainly think so. And I've alluded to this earlier. We've been doing business in the state since 2014 with a different tax credit product, but nonetheless have been doing business in this state for, coming on 8 years. I don't know how the rest of the world looks at Nevada, but in terms of Stonehenge and what we see in this state, we certainly are very bullish.
And I'm curious, what's in how many projects you have on the board right now?
In this state, 4 to 5.
4 to 5. 4 to 5. What do you see, Steve, from the numbers? Depending, I know this is it's kind of an open question, but the numbers of affordable housing units, what do you see the next 2 to 3 years? If you had a crystal ball.
Well, you know, you heard the governor yesterday indicate we've developed almost 5,000 units, or maybe it was just over 5,000 units through creation and preservation during his term. The unprecedented opportunity to see exactly how this gets used, whether it be the Build Back Better funding or the ARPA funding, really can accelerate that. And that number is pretty good, you know, for the past 3 years. Man, I don't want to crystal ball. There's too many moving parts to say, and it really depends on how we're going to use this funding. And it's been a discussion, you know, if we use, and I'll just isolate it, if we use ARPA funding specifically for the buy down of AMI, okay? And that's all it's going to get used for. We create 0 new units. However, we've created a huge amount of units that were completely inaccessible prior to that level of funding coming in to a population that is completely underserved. So it really depends on what the priorities are going to be of the administration and how we're going to use that funding to do that.
David, how many projects do you have on the board?
We have quite a few developments on the board. Some of them will rely on some ARPA funding, but I would say in our pipeline in the next 2 to 3 years, we have over 1,000 units on the board.
Wow. Other questions? Christine.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Awesome discussion. Patrick, I have a question for you. So this is all amazing. We need more affordable housing and an incredible tool. Love this conversation. With your work around the country, are there any cautionary tales for Nevada as we move forward that you've seen in the state tax credit world as it's been deployed? Is it really just that we may run out too soon is almost what I'm hearing?
To answer your question, but also not answer your question at the same time. The funniest thing is that when I tell people that there is a state tax credit program here, that is like complete news to them. So I think in that perspective, I think there's not a risk of running out, you know, too soon. I think it's more of telling people that there is a resource out there that is available, because I've had multiple conversations with people at this conference that had zero idea that an actual state tax credit existed. So to answer your question, I don't think that there is a risk of, you know, the credits, you know, being deployed too early. I mean, one, there's a statute limitation of how many can be applied for each year. But yeah, I think that the biggest thing going forward is kind of, you know, expanding the knowledge and kind of, you know, getting the word out about the program, because, you know, if it's a great program in my opinion, just has to get done.
Since you have the mic, are there other go ahead. Sure.
You said that you can issue $10 to $13 million worth of credit per year, but if you issue the 13, you're borrowing from the next year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. In 20 and 21, have you met the $10 million?
No, we have not. As I indicated initially, as we could issue it in fiscal 21, we just got the $3 million out. Now, so there is effectively
20 million?
7.
Yeah, well, that was past last fiscal year. So I'm not sure what right now we're still operating in that 10 million to go up to 13. But then it does roll forward. So we can do that.
Okay, so did you use the 10 million for 2020?
No, we didn't. No, we have not.
Okay, so in 2021, you only have one application.
I don't know that we only had one application, but we only have one reservation.
One reservation.
Yeah.
So in 2022, will you be able to issue all of the back years?
We can potentially do that as I read the legislation. Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? May.
What about help for retired seniors on a fixed income? Could we maybe extend leases with built-in increases for those senior tenants?
I'm looking at the property manager here.
I'll answer the best that I can. Rent limits are for affordable housing under the LIHTC program are set by HUD every year. So they and recently they have gone up significantly. I can say our organization through the entirety of COVID so far has not raised rents on our tenants, which has been a fairly significant financial impact to us. But it's been our mission not to overburden our residents during a time that's burdened everyone. But those limits are set by HUD based on the incomes in a particular county or city.
So just as kind of a simple question, it's building on this gentleman's question. How do you apply for the state tax credit? I mean, what's the process for all these people in the room? They go, how do we get some of that?
So effectively, as it sits right now, you send in a project submission to the division. So you will work with Michael Holliday, our Chief Financial Officer. And again, as it sits right now, it lives in that bond application process. So you fill out your bond application, you identify the source of state tax credits, and that you need, X amount, and the check's all on the way. So that's again, that's how it currently is structured.
Just part of the process.
Part of the process.
Hold on just a second. Just trying to get the mic. Thank you.
So it can only be applied for with the 4%, not with the 9%?
That is, as it currently is structured, yes. Okay. We have the flexibility to change that, but we were using this as a production vehicle via the 4% program. And that's what, so that's where for a lot of you folks, the 4%, we probably get, when you talk about affordable housing, and Mendy indicated what is affordable housing earlier, about 80% of what is produced and acquired and rehabbed through the state is done through the 4% program. The 9% program is very, very specific. We have limited amount. You heard there might even be a rollback of some of those 9% credits for the next year. We only get about 8 to 9 million because it's based on the state's population. And what we found when we were building this program, we didn't find gaps, particularly in the 9% program. And so that's what this was really designed to do, because as David indicated, that $3 million, that extra $3 million creates all that additional equity that can potentially come into the project. So that was our main focus, and didn't change it. Want to see if it works that way with all that is circulating around in the ether.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
So, excuse me, because I'm flying blind here. I just came in. I thought I didn't know about this meeting just till about 30 minutes ago. So I probably look like I flew in hot.
That's okay. Neither did we.
Sliding into home base, right? But I am a 4th generation Nevadan here from some prominent families, and we are really concerned about our affordable housing and what's being done. I didn't know this was existing, but I'm the CEO of Regenerative and Local Sparks, and we've applied for the government on Zoom grants, and with the Clark County and the Las Vegas City, and they're all in those pre-application phases, right? So my whole point is sometimes we need to see action. So what we believe is that we're going to get the truth about what the truth is through transparency. So in our board meetings, and I invite everyone that wants to look at what we're doing, it's a whole different business model, but we're creating pods of sustainability inside of communities so that you have from the inside out growing sustainability. So if there ever was a need, you would be all emergency prepared around those areas that produce food, water, and power. And you heard me right, water. So it produces water as well. So we can create these places that we can all exist. And we've been trying to apply for these funds, and I know everyone's going, great, we hear that there's all these funds, but we're not seeing them put into place. And we've got land that we've got organized and donated, and processors and technology. I mean, we don't need much, but just, community support is probably a little bit of what we need. And we could show how we could create this abundance for it. We call it common good solutions for the common good. And that would be the majority of the people instead of the select few. And I always try to stay up on the positive notes. So if anyone's interested, I don't know what I'm doing except for asking questions. But the question is, I've applied for those grants and I haven't heard back. So what's my next step? Now what?
Yeah, so effectively, that's a Clark County program that you're talking about.
Do you need a hug now? Because I probably gave you a lashing, and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I didn't know.
No, it's all good.
Okay.
It's all good because it's going to lead to something else that I want you to do.
Okay.
So Clark County, you're right. They've done an application process, and I don't know if Kristen is here, but Kristen Cooper is if she's still on campus, that's who you
She's
would
on the
need.
other side,
You would need to speak to directly, and she can tell you exactly what their process is. None of us can speak to that. However, I will tell you that there is a sort of a parallel path with the state ARP funding. And so if you have a proposal that you are looking for ARP money to go through, you need to go in the next 2 days, because the portal shuts down on the 31st, to nevadarecovers.com and submit. You can do a survey or you can submit a proposal. And if you're looking for state funding, and this goes out to anybody, has nothing to do with particularly state housing tax credits, but if you're looking for that ARP discretionary bucket from the state, then you go to nevadarecovers.com.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
I just want to share with you, I work on the Christian, and I'll introduce you to her. Okay.
Well, we're coming to a close. This has been extremely educational and informative. And I'd like to really thank our panelists, Steve, David, Paul, thanks so much. I think it's been amazing. And for those of you, sorry, I called you Paul, Patrick, I'm sorry, I have a call I have to make. He's going to be here. He's from out of town. He's got money, so.
He knows how to get money.
And he knows how to get money. So this is a guy, and Wells Fargo's in the back of the room too, and they're great. I see them, and they're great about buying our tax credits. So thank you very much for your time today.